Okay, good morning everybody. We're on DAF Kuf Chaf Dalid Amud Aleph. We're at the... Is that the Mishnah? Yeah, that's where we're up to. Okay, good. We're actually, even though we're starting a new Mishnah, it's really a continuation of everything that we saw yesterday. So I don't think we're going to see too many chidushim today. We may see a couple of ideas that we'll later reject, but basically, let's just review this machlokas between Abai and Rava that we saw yesterday. We're going to see this repeated over and over again. Abai and Rava had a discussion yesterday about whether there's any distinction between tzarech gufo and tzarech makomo in regarding a kli shemalachto le'isser. So just to redefine those terms, a kli that is used for forbidden purposes under normal circumstances, such as a hammer. Both Abai and Rav agree that you're allowed to use a hammer to crack walnuts on Shabbos, but are you allowed to pick up a hammer if you need the place where the hammer is resting? Rava says there's absolutely no distinction between tzarech gufo and tzarech makomo in this regard. If something is permitted to be metaltel, to handle l'tzarech gufo, then it's automatically permitted l'tzarech makomo. Abaye says not so fast. When it comes to a kli shemalachto le'isser, it's only permitted to move l'tzarech gufo, but not l'tzarech makomo. When does Rava say that a kli shemalachto le'isser is usser to move? Only when it's mechama l'tzeil. Only when you need to move the hammer, not for any need of that the hammer can provide, but rather to protect the hammer from injury because it's in the sun or some other element might damage it where it is. Okay? That's the machlokas, keep it in mind. We also saw yesterday the shita of Rabbi Nechemia. Now, Rabbi Nechemia is the most stringent regarding the laws of muksa of the Tanoim, and he says that even when we permit you to move muksa l'tzarech gufo, you can only move it for the purpose for which that object is designated. So, and that's what we're going to see in our Mishnah and in the ensuing discussion in the Gemara. According to Rabbi Nechemia, if you want to pick up a nutcracker, you can only pick up a nutcracker either because you need the place where the nutcracker is resting, or you need to crack nuts. But if you need the nutcracker to act as a door stopper, then you're not allowed to pick up the nutcracker. Okay, let's go on. Mishnah says, Kol hakelim nitalon l'tzarech v'shelo l'tzarech. All utensils may be handled on Shabbos either for a need or even not for a need. Now, what this need or what this purpose is, we'll see in a moment. And Rabbi Nechemia Omer Eini Tolan Elo L'Tzarech. And Rabbi Nechemia says they can only be handled for a purpose. So tzarech I could either translate as need or purpose. I think either translation is acceptable. I don't know what Art Scroll puts in.
Necessity.
Necessity. I don't know. I
like yours.
Yeah, I think purpose is better. Because necessity implies that I need it. Right? You need it. Well, maybe you don't need walnuts. Maybe you can get by it with Shabbos without walnuts. Right? But that's, so it's not a necessity, but it's a purpose. Yeah. Okay. So the Gemara now says, "My litzarech or my shelo litzarech." What is this tzarech, and how are we defining these terms, litzarech and shelo litzarech? Amar Rabba. So Rabba says litzarech davar shemalachto leheter. So he says it depends. So Rabba, by the way, according to some Rishonim, this should really read Abaya, because this is actually identical to the sheet of Abaya that I just spoke out. He says, Litzorech, what is the word Litzorech? So it depends. Davar shemalachto leheter, if you're dealing with something like a utensil that is normally used for permissible things like a nutcracker, so then Litzorech gufo, then you're allowed to move it Litzorech gufo. And shelo litzarech davar shemalachto leheter litzarech makomo. Then, and shelo litzarech, meaning if there's no purpose, what that means is that if it's that same nutcracker and you want to move it, but not to crack nuts, but rather because you need the place where the nutcracker is resting, that's called shelo litzarech. And therefore comes along Rabbi Nechemia and says that you cannot move a nutcracker if you just need the place where it's resting. He says, no, you wouldn't be, Rabbi Nechemia says, Eini tolan elo litzarech. You can only move it if you need to crack walnuts, but you can't move it if you want the place where the nutcracker is resting. The davar shemalachto le'isser. Now, when it comes to things where the designated use of that object is for isser, such as a hammer, so then litzarech gufo in litzarech makomo lo. So then then even the Tanakama would agree that you're only allowed to use it litzarech gufo, but not litzarech mekomo. In other words, even the Tanakama who says litzarech and shelo litzarech, that's only for kli shemalachto leheter, but for kli shemalachto leisser, like a hammer, you would not be allowed to, even according to the Tanakama, would not be allowed to pick it up if the whole purpose is because you need the place where the hammer is resting. The Aser Rabbi Nechemya Lameimar, so comes along Rabbi Nechemya and says, Va'afilu davar shemalachto leheter litzarech gufo in litzarech mekomo lo. And Rabbi Nechemya is of the opinion that even a nutcracker, which is davar shemalachto leheter, can only be picked up legufo, but not litzarech mekomo. And as Rashi points out very carefully, Rabbi Nechemya is further machmir that he only allows you to crack nuts with a nutcracker. You cannot use it for anything else. Okay? Now, Amar le Rava litzarech mekomo shelo litzarech karis question mark. So Rava challenges Rabba, which, as I said, is the same sheet as Abaya. And he says, I don't understand what you're saying. You're telling me that when the Mishnah says that you can use something litzarech only means litzarech gufo, but not litzarech mekomo. Both of them are called a purpose. I have a purpose in picking up something that's purposeful in picking up this kli, either because I need the kli itself or if I need the place of the kli. Why should there be, logically, why should there be any difference in that same sense of purpose in picking it up? So, Ella Amar Rava, so rather Rava says, Litzorech davar shemalachto leheter. So therefore, we would define litzorech as follows. When it comes to a davar shemalachto leheter, like a nutcracker, bein litzorech gufo, bein litzorech mekomo, then I can move it, whether it's tzorech gufo or tzorech mekomo. I need the nutcracker itself, or whether I need the place. Shelo litzorech va'afilu mechama litzel. What does shelo litzorech mean? It means that if I have a nutcracker resting in the sun, so when it says I can move it even when there's no purpose, it means I only want to move it because I want to protect the nutcracker, but I don't have any purpose in moving the nutcracker for any kind of utility for either the place or the nutcracker itself. The davar shemlachto leisser litzarech gufo ulitzarech mekomo in mechama litzel lo. And therefore the Tanakama says that when it comes to kli shemlachto leisser, like a hammer, then I'm allowed to, I hope I didn't make a mistake. I'm allowed to move a kli shemalachto leheter for all purposes. I can move that nutcracker for litzarech gufo. I can move it litzarech mekomo, and shelo litzarech means I can even move it from the sun to the shade. But comes along Rabbi Nechemya and says, no, you cannot move it from the sun to the shade because that's called shelo litzarech. That's called not for the purpose, something purposeful right now. That's Rabbi Nechemya. Va'afil davar shemalachto leheter litzarech gufo litzarech mekomo in mechama litzel lo. And comes along Rabbi Nechemya and he says, no, I hold that even a kli shemalachto leheter, even a nutcracker, cannot be moved mechama litzel. So the Tanakama says nutcrackers, do whatever you want with them. Hammers, you can only move litzarech gufo litzarech mekomo, but not mechama litzel. And Rabbi Nechemya comes along and says even nutcrackers, which is davar shemalachto leheter, can only be moved litzarech gufo litzarech mekomo, but not mechama litzel. That's a little bit confusing. Probably good to have one of the Rabbi Torchiner charts for this kind of Gemara, but you'll have to speak to Rabbi Torchiner about that. Yosef, Rav Safra, Rav Acha, Bar Huna, Rav Huna, Bar Chanina, V'yasvi, Yikomel Rabba. So these rabbis were sitting down and speaking to Rabba, and they said, Aliba de Rabbi Nechemya. So according to Rabbi Nechemya, Hani Ka'aros, Heichi Metal Talinon. So we have a very basic question. According to Rabbi Nechemya, now remember, what does Rabbi Nechemya say according to Rabba? Rabba and Abaya are the same, and they say that you cannot move even a kli shemalachto leheter litzorech mekomo. Only litzorech gufo you can move it, but not litzorech mekomo. So I have a very simple question. You have your Shabbos meal, you have your bowl of cholent, and now lunch is over. How are you going to move the plates? How do you remove the plates from off the table? You don't need the plates litzarech gufo anymore because you've already had your lunch. So the only reason that you need to move the plates is to get them off the table. That's called litzarech mekomo. According to Rabbi Nechemya, how can you ever clear the table after a meal on Shabbos? So Amar Lahu, Rav Safra midi dahava graf shel rei. So Rav Safra responds, no, the rabbis gave a special dispensation to a chamber pot that you're allowed to empty it from your house on Shabbos, even though under normal circumstances it would be usher because of muktzah. But they gave a special dispensation, a special heter, when it comes to something that will ruin your oneg Shabbos. They said you're allowed to empty it from your house. The same thing can be argued with dirty plates on your table. They allow you to clear the table because of graf shel rei. That's the answer. But other kinds of things that you only need l'tzarech makomo, you cannot move, according to Rabbi Nechemia. So Amarle Abaya l'Rabba. So now Abaya says to Rabbi, his Rebbe, they both hold to the same sheet. He says, let me ask you a question. Lamara liba de Rabbi Nechemia, hani karos heichim etaltalinan lahu. Again, the same question. How can you remove the plates off the table? Amarle Rav Safra. So Rav Safra said back to him, Chavrin tirgama, Mida dahava graf shel rei. Said our friend already explained, because it's of a principle of graf shel rei that something that's unseemly can be moved on Shabbos. If it was clean, you couldn't move it. Exactly.
So the reason you're moving it is not because of makomo, but because of the dirty dishes.
Well, you are moving it l'tzarech makomo, but the point is that there's a special heter that even though normally tzarech makomo is usher according to Rabbi Nechemia, here it's mutter because of this principle of graf shel rei.
Right.
Are you following me?
I'm following, but I'm saying, isn't that the principal reason you're moving it? Graf shel rei, not makomo? Even though...
No. That's the part where I just want to... You are moving it l'tzarech makomo. L'tzarech makomo means you want to clear off the table so that you can have a clean table.
Right.
That's all l'tzarech makomo means. I need the place. I need it to be clean. The reason why that's permitted to do, even though normally tzarech makomo is usher, is because of this principle that the rabbis lightened up on anything that is a chamber, like a chamber pot. They said even though normally you can't move a chamber pot, we're giving you a heter to move it. So even though normally tzarech makomo is usher, here tzarech makomo is mutter. Am I being clear? Okay.
They wouldn't do the same thing for safety on items like a hammer. Let's say it was in a hallway or somebody could trip on it.
They do. The rabbis do say when there's a sakana, if you have broken glass on the floor, even though it may be muktzah, you're allowed to clean it up because of sakana. The rabbis do give such a dispensation. Eisvei Abaya l'Rava. So now Abaya challenges Rava. Meducha im yesh bashom metaltalin oso v'im lavein metaltalin oso. So Abaya says to Rava, according to you, Rava, that you're allowed to move anything l'tzarech gufo or l'tzarech makomo, then why did the Brisa say that only when the pestle has garlic in it can it be moved? That it must be saying that l'tzarech makomo it's usher to move it, and that's why you need to have garlic in it. So this presents to you a challenge, Rava. So Rava says no. A pestle is a klisha malachta le'isr because normally use it for grinding. The reason why you're allowed to move it is because tzarech gufo or l'tzarech makomo. But here the Bryce is talking about when you want to move it to prevent the pestle from being damaged by the sun. And that I agree that if it's a klisha malachta le'isr and it's mechama l'tzel, it's going to be usr. Now, Esvei, the Shavin Shimkitze Velav Basar Shasel Taltalo. What about that Brisa that we also saw yesterday? The machlokas between the discussion between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel about using a special klisha malachto le'isr to hack meat on Yantiv. They both agree that if you've already cut your meat and you've already provided for Simchas Yantiv, then you're no longer allowed to use the kli that's shemalachto le'isr. According to you, Rava, what's the problem? You say that both l'tzarech gufo and l'tzarech makom was perfectly fine. The Gemara answers, hachanami mechama l'tzeil. So too, that kli that is being used to cut the meat, your only reason you want to move it is to remove it from injury, from the sunlight, and there too, it's not permitted. V'hadit nan ein somchenes akeder bebikas v'chein bedeles. So now let's look at a Mishnah that appears in the halachas of Yantif in Maseches Beitza. The Mishnah over there says that even though a log of firewood is not muktzah on Yantif because you're allowed to create a fire on Yantif, however, you're not allowed to use that log in order to support or prop up a pot or to use it as a door stopper. So the question is, v'habika bikas to be yom tov davar shemalachta leheteru, alma davar shemalachta leheter bein l'tzarech gufo bein l'tzarech makamo aser. This is really a kasha on both Rabba and Rava. Both Rabba and Rava are going to have a problem with this because on Yantif, something that is designated for heter, you're allowed to move it. At least l'tzarech gufo, and here you need this door. You need this log to act as a door stopper. Everyone would agree that that would be permitted. So the question is, how are you going to reconcile this Mishnah? Why should there be any problem? Even Rabbi Nechemia, who says that a davar shemalachta leheter is asur l'tzarech makomo, according to Abaya and Rabbi, would still say l'tzarech gufa, it's permitted. So according to everybody, this mission is problematic. So the Gemara says, Hasam hainu taima kevin de b'Shabbos davar shemalachta leisrahu gezerah yantiv atu Shabbos. Very interesting svara. It says because since a log would be muktzah on Shabbos, the rabbi prohibited the use of a log for anything else except for kindling on Yantif as well. And they said if you're going to treat it like a utensil instead of using it for kindling, then because of Shabbos it's going to be muktzah. So the Gemara says v'chi tema Shabbos gufei tishtri dahadavar shemalach de'leiser l'tzarach gufa l'tzarach makomo shari. Maybe you'll argue that why aren't you allowed to use a log on Shabbos as a door stopper or as a prop to prop something up? I mean, after all, it's davar shemalachta leheter. It's got a permissible use because you want to use it, even though it's normally designated for kindling. But it's l'tzarech gufo, l'tzarech makomo. You're allowed to use it, at least according to you, Rava. So hanimili heichadika taras kliyalav, but heichadaleka taras kliyalav lo. But that's only true when it's a kli. When you have a kli, a utensil, an instrument, then we are lenient and we say you're allowed to move it l'tzarech gufa or l'tzarech makomo, kli shemalach d'leiser. But when it's not even a kli, because it's just a piece of wood, so then we don't allow you to move it on Shabbos at all, even according to Rava. So the Gemara now says umi gazrina. So let's go back to your original answer. You're telling me that on Yantif you're not allowed to use a log for anything other than kindling because of where gozer Yantif atu Shabbos. We say that since on Shabbos this is muktzah, on Yantif you treat it as muktzah as well. So since when do we do that? V'hatznan meshilin peres derech haruba b'Yamtov avalo b'Shabbos. I can demonstrate to you that there's a fundamental difference between Shabbos and Yantif. We're more lenient on Yantif than on Shabbos when it comes to muktzah things. And to wit, there's a Mishnah that says that if I have fruit drying on my rooftop on Yantif and it starts to rain and I'm worried that it's going to ruin the fruit, I'm allowed to, using as little inertia as possible, move the fruit from the roof into the skylight so that it'll fall into the house. But I'm not allowed to do that on Shabbos. So you see that there is a distinction between the laws of muktzah between Shabbos and Yantiv. So the Gemara says, Umi lo gazrina. How can you say that we don't equate Shabbos and Yantiv together? V'hatnan ein ben Yantiv l'Shabbos ela ochel nefesh bilvad. Isn't there a Mishnah that says explicitly that everything is equivalent between Shabbos and Yantiv except preparing food? So you see that the laws of muktzah should be equivalent. So I have one Mishnah that says the laws of muktzah are not equivalent. I have another Mishnah that implies the laws are equivalent. So how do you reconcile it? Amar Rav Yoseph lo kasha haRebbi Eliezer haRebbi Yehoshua. Answers the Gemara, it's a machlokes tanoim, as to whether we equate Shabbos to Yantif or whether we say that Yantif is more lenient. The Tanya, and here's the brisa to demonstrate that. Oso v'espeno shenaflu labor. We saw this before. If you have a mother and its calf that fall into a pit on Yantif, so Rabbi Eliezer Omer Malis Arishon Manas L'Shachta V'Shachta V'Sheni Oselo Parnasa B'Makomo B'Shvil Shelo Yamus. So Rabbi Eliezer says you can only take out one animal, and whatever animal you leave in, since you're not allowed to shecht it because of the law of Oso V'Espino, so you have to just take care of it at the edge of the pit and make sure that it's well fed and cared for. And Rabbi Yeshua Omer Malis Arishon Manas L'Shachta V'Eino Shachta Mara Malis Arsheni Ratzes Shochet Ratzes Shochet. And Rabbi Yeshua says no, that you have a right to pull out the first animal, whether it's the mother or the calf, and say, let me think about it. Should I eat you? Well, let me take a look at the other one, see if that one looks tastier. And then you could pull out the second one and decide which one you want to eat. It's a certain kind of subterfuge, granted, but on Yontif we're more permissive. So the Gemara wants to demonstrate from here that you see there's two different attitudes towards how we treat Yontif. One is more machmer, that's Rabbi Eliezer, and the Gemara says, therefore Rabbi Eliezer equates the chumras of Shabbos to the chumras of Yantiv, and Rabbi Yoshua is more lenient, and he says, no, you can be liberal, and you can use subterfuges, and therefore we can also be lenient on the laws of muktzah on Yantiv more than Shabbos. The Gemara says, Mimai, how do you know that that's the same machlokas as over here? Dilma adkan lo kama Rabbi Eliezer hasam aladef sheleparnasa. Aval hecha de lo efshel leparnasa lo. Maybe the only reason why Rabbi Eliezer is more machmir in the case of the two animals that fall into a pit is because you have an option of taking care of the second animal by feeding it from the edge of the pit. But maybe when you have no other option, maybe when it's going to totally inconvenience you, you're going to suffer loss, maybe Rabbi Eliezer would be just as permissive as Rabbi Yehoshua. And furthermore, inami atkan lo kama Rabbi Yehoshua hasam defshir b'harama, aval heichad l'efshir b'harama lo. And furthermore, maybe Rabbi Yehoshua is only lenient in that case is because subterfuge is an option. But maybe when there's no option of subterfuge, maybe when the scenario doesn't allow for doing some kind of, well, let me think about it for a second, and trying to use that kind of fuzzy logic, maybe Rabbi Shua will be just as machmir as Rabbi Eliezer and say that Yom Tov and Shabbos are exactly equivalent. So you have no way of adducing from that machlokas the law, whether or not they're going to be as machmir on Yom Tov regarding the laws of muktzah as they will be on Shabbos. Ela Amar Rav Papa lo kasha. So rather Rav Papa says the reconciliation is as follows: Ha Beis Shammai, Ha Beis Hillel. So machlokas Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel. Ditnan Beis Shammai Omrim Ein Motzina Sakatan Besalula Vesefer Torah L'Reshus Harabim UBeis Hillel Matirin. The machlokas is as follows. We know that on Yom Tov, we paskin like Beis Hillel that you're allowed to carry everything. You're allowed to carry a Sefer Torah, you're allowed to carry your siddur to shul, you're allowed to carry a child. On Shabbos, you're not allowed to carry anything in Reshus Harabim. Now, Beis Shammai disagree, and Beis Shammai say that you're only allowed to carry food because the Torah only permits you to carry things that are for ochel nefesh. The machlokas revolves around a principle called mitoch, which we won't analyze carefully today, but the point that the Gemara is trying to draw from this machlokas is that you see how liberal Beis Hillel is regarding the laws of carrying, so it stands to reason that he's more liberal when it comes to laws of muktzah as well, on Yom Tov more so than on Shabbos. But Beis Shammai, who's extremely limiting in the way that he allows you to carry, he only says it's for ochel nefesh, he's the one who says that the only difference between Shabbos and Yom Tov is ochel nefesh, and as far as the laws of muktzah, we're just as machmir on Yom Tov as we are on Shabbos. And that's why the Mishnah that talked about not being able to use a bika, not being able to use a log on Shabbos as your doorstopper would have to go according to Beis Shammai and not according to Beis Hillel. So now the Gemara says, but wait a minute. Ema d'shamas leBeis Shammai hotzah tiltul mishamas lehu. How do you know that you can make that comparison? Maybe Beis Shammai is only machmir when it comes to carrying. How do you know that he's machmir when it comes to laws of muktzah? So the Gemara says, "V'tiltul gufei lav mishum hotzah." He question mark, and this is a very important line in the Gemara. Says the Gemara, well, why do you think the rabbis instituted the laws of muktzah in the first place? One very fundamental reason why the rabbis instituted the laws of muktzah was to prevent us from carrying on Shabbos. And therefore, if you're going to be machmir about the laws of carrying on Yom Tov, it's because you're machmir about the laws of muktzah on Yom Tov. The whole reason why the rabbis told us not to handle certain things is they said, lest you come to carry them outside. That's at least one of the reasons for muktzah. And if that's the case, then if someone is more restrictive, Beis Shammai is more restrictive about what you're allowed to carry on Yom Tov, it means they're more restrictive about the whole laws of handling things on Yom Tov. And therefore they equate Yom Tov and Shabbos completely. Okay. But now let's go back to our discussion that we started with regarding this whole machlokas between Rabbah and Rava, whether something is, when you only need it l'tzorach makomo, and it's a klisha malachta l'isser, whether you're allowed to handle it or not. Ba'af Rav savar la la Rava. The Amar Rav mar shelo yiganev zehu tiltul shelo l'tzorach va'aser. So he said, Rav had said that if you have a pick, which is a certain kind of tool, it's a klisha malachta l'isser, clearly. If you only want to move it to prevent it from getting stolen because it's in a public area, that's aser. That's the only time it's aser to move it. So time is shelo yiganev v'lotzorach guf l'tzorach makomo muter. So you see from there that Rav holds like Rava, that even a klisha malachta l'isser can always be moved, both l'tzorach gufa and l'tzorach makomo. So the Gemara says, Ani, is this really so? V'harav kahana ikla lebei Rava amar aisi lishuta lekahana leisei v'alei. So, but one second, we know a story that when Rav Kahana once came to visit Rav, he said, hey, everybody, bring out the shuta, which is some kind of trap, like let's say a box trap. He said, bring out the trap so that Rav Kahana has something to sit on. Now, why did he have to emphasize the word so that he has something to sit on? Isn't that coming to point out, Lav Lamemer, the Davar Shemlach Delis L'Sarach Guf In L'Sarach Makom Lo? Wasn't it to try and that we should learn from his instruction that the only reason why you can move this box is for the sake of Litzarach Gufa, because you need someone to sit on it. But if you needed to move the box because you needed the place where it was resting, it would be Usr. So you see that Rav holds like Rabba and Abaya, not like Rava. So the Gemara says no. Hachi Amar Lahu, Shkulu Shuta Mikmei Kahana. So one explanation is no. Rab didn't say move the box for Kahana. He said move the box away from Kahana so he has a place to sit. And that is L'tzarach Mekomo. So you see from there that he holds like Rava. Another answer could be is that the reason why Rab specifically said bring the box so that Rav Kahana can sit down was because the circumstances, without interpreting, without any commentary to it, looked like that by moving the box, you were moving it to protect the box because it was in the sunlight, and there was a fear that it would get damaged. So if Rav had not said, move the box so that Rav Kahana can sit on it, people might have thought that you can even move something that's Klisha Malachta L'Isser, Mechama L'Tzeil. And that's what Rav wanted to try and make sure people didn't misunderstand. Rav Mori Bar Rochel Havale Hahi Beis Sajusa B'Shimsha. So Rav Mori Bar Rochel once had a set of linens, that looked linen cushions, it seems like from Rashi, that were sitting in the sun. Asa Lakame de Rav and Amarle Mahalatil Tulinu. And he asked Rav, he says, Rebbe, am I allowed to move these? And Amarle Shari. And he said, Rava said, yeah, sure you can move them. So because it's a Klishim Lachta Leheter. Right? There's nothing wrong with moving, even if it's Mechama Letzel, you're allowed to move it. So then the man persisted and he said, but Isli Achrina. So he said, but I have another set of linen cushions. I don't need these for Shabbos. So Rabbi said, that's okay. Chazul orchin. He says, but maybe guests will come along and you'll use it for your guests. So the man persisted and he said, Isli nami lo orchim. And he said, yeah, but I have enough for my guests as well. If guests show up, I'll have plenty. I don't need to move these for the guests. I just want to move it to make sure they don't get damaged. So Rabbi said to him, well, by this persistent argumentation, you're demonstrating that you paskin like Rabba, and you hold that even a klisha malachto laheter, if you want to move it mechama letzel just to protect the object, it's usher. So listen, I paskin for everyone else that it's mutter, but if you're going to persist, then for you it's usher. I can't tell how many times this happens to me. A person calls me up and says, what should I do? I said, it's okay, don't worry about it, it's mutter. But it's mutter. But okay, it's usher. What do you want me to tell you? You want to usher it? Gesundheit. So don't eat it. Fine. What should I tell you? All right. Amar Rebbe Abba, Amar Rebbe Chia Bar Ashi, Amar Rav. So he says, Machbeida shel milsa. Look, listen. Klal Yisrael are holy people, so they want to go the extra mile. Amar Rav Machbeida shel milsa motel l'taltalin b'Shabbos avol shel tomorrow lo. So Rav is quoted as saying that there's two different kinds of brooms or sweepers, and one is a kind of sweeper which is very soft bristles, made out of like a silk kind of bristle, that you're allowed to handle on Shabbos, because by using that kind of broom you're not doing any mashvagumos. You're not, even if you would sweep the earth on the ground, you wouldn't be filling any holes. You wouldn't be doing a malacha. But the broom that is used with hard bristles from palm trees, that because by sweeping the floor with that broom you're going to be mashvagumos, you're going to be smoothing out the floor, then it's muktzah, and you can't even handle it on Shabbos. So Rebbe Lazar Omer afshel tamara, and Rebbe Lazar says no, you're allowed to handle hard bristle brooms also. So b'mayaskin, what are we talking about when we say aser? So ilema l'tzarach gufa l'tzarach makomo b'halei marav shel tamar lo v'harav kerava svirle. So if you're telling me that you need to move the broom, either l'tzarach gufa l'tzarach makomo, then why would Rav say that it's aser to move the hard bristle broom? He holds like Rava, who says let even a klisha malachta l'isser, if you need it l'tzarach gufa l'tzarach makomo, you're allowed to move it. So ela mechama l'tzeil. So beha lema Rabbi Elazar afshel tamara. But the other alternative is you want to move the broom to protect it because it's in a place which is not safe or it might get damaged or stolen. So then why would Rabbi Elazar say that it's mutter to move such a thing? Everyone holds that a klisha malachto le'isser, you're not allowed to move mechama letzel. Even Rav agrees to that. So the Gemara says, la'olam mechama letzel, ema v'chein amar Rabbi Elazar. The Gemara offers the answer that really, in the case where we say that you can't move the hard bristle broom, it's because you want to protect the broom. And there is no machlokas. Rabbi Elazar also agrees that if it's to protect it, you're not allowed to move it. And you have to sort of reread or modify the text, that it's not that Rabbi Elazar disagrees, but he agrees and says that you're not allowed to move it if it's mechama l'tzeil. Let's go on to the next Mishnah because we're running out of time. Any utensil that is that is non-muksa, that can be handled on Shabbos, the broken remnants of that kli are also allowed to be handled with them, provided that they are still functional. So shivrei areva lachasus bo espiachavos, and examples of this would be that if you have a broken trough and you can still use it to cover a barrel, or shivrei zechuchas lachasus bohen espiapach, or if you have a broken glass utensil and you can still use the shards of glass to cover a jug. But if they're so tiny and fragmented that they serve no purpose at all, they're not functional at all, then they become muktzah. Rabbi Yehuda Omer bilvad shu osin me'in malachtan shivrei areva latzuk l'sochan mikfeh. Rabbi Yehuda disagrees. He's more machmir, and he says no. The only time that the broken shards of a kli are not muktzah, are permitted on Shabbos, is not just if they're functional, but they have to serve the original function that that kli served before it was broken. So therefore, a trough is used to hold liquids or to hold solids, and so this shard of a trough has to at least be concave enough that it could hold something extremely viscous. And similarly, the glass shard, since a glass jug or glass vase or container is used to hold liquidy items like a bottle of oil, then the shard has to be concave enough that it could hold some oil in it. And if not, you can't just use it as a cover because it's no longer providing the same functionality that it did when it was an intact kli.
So the shards know?
The shards are what?
Know that?
We'll see that in just a minute. We didn't talk about when it broke. You're making an assumption that it broke on Shabbos. Let's see. Let's take a look. It's a good point. Amar Rav Yehuda Omar Shmuel Machloka Shenishberu Me'erev Shabbos Demar Savar Me'in Malachtan In Me'in Malacha Acheres Lo Umar Savar Afila Me'in Malacha Acheres. The Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, the Machlokas over here is when the kli broke before Shabbos, and the Machlokas therefore is that Rabbi Yehuda says it has to provide the same function that it did before it broke, and the Tanakama holds that no, even if it provides a different functionality, it's perfectly fine. Aval nishberu b'Shabbos divrei hakol mutarin holu muchanan al gabi avihan gabi avihan mutar. But if they break on Shabbos, then everyone would agree that because at the inception of Shabbos this was part of a permissible object, then that permissibility never leaves even after the kli broke. Now this is a logical argument that you're only going to see on this page of Masechah Shabbos. So you should quickly forget it, because the Gemara is going to reject this as being totally counterintuitive. Because when it comes to things that break on Shabbos, we're more machmir, not more mekel, as the Gemara is arguing over here. Right? So, but there is a certain logic to being more mekel, and the logic that the Gemara presents is, well, listen, because it was part of something that the inception of Shabbos was completely permitted and it was intact, so therefore, even if it breaks, it never loses that status that it had at the inception of Shabbos. So Mosiv Rav Zutroi, says, wait, that doesn't make any sense. Look at the following brisa: Masikin bekelim vein masikin b'shivrei kelim. The Mishnah says in Maseches BAYT in reference to burning things on Yantif, it says, what can you use as fuel on Yantif? You can use both intact utensils and broken utensils. Now, Dinishberu Amos, when did these utensils break? Ilema Dinishberu Me Erev Yomtov Eitzin Ba'almaninu. If they broke before Yantif, then why would the Brisa say that you're not allowed to burn with broken utensils? I mean, after all, it's no different from firewood. Fine, it's not a utensil anymore, but you can use firewood on Yantif, which is not a utensil. So why can't you use shards of pottery? That's as much as firewood. So elalav biyamtov v'ketani masikin b'kelim ve'in masikin b'shivrei kelim. So therefore, you see that we're talking about where the pottery breaks on Yantif, and the point is that because it's nolad, like Rav David said, it's nolad. It's something that newly it gains a new status on Yontif, whereas before at the inception of Yontif it was a kli. Now it's a broken kli. It has a new functionality, so that's why you can't burn with it on Yontif. Ela'i itmar hachi itmar. So therefore you have to modify the way that Shmuel had said it. Amar of Yehuda Amar Shmuel machlokas shenishberu b'Shabbos. The machlokas is when the pottery breaks on Shabbos. The marsaver muchanhu, marsaver noladhu. That what's the machlokas between the Tanakama and Rebbe Yehuda? The Tanakama says that even if the object breaks on Shabbos, you can still use it because it's still called muchan, because it still has a functionality. And Rebbe Yehuda says no. If it can't serve the original functionality, then it's a new object and you can't use it. It's muktzah. But if the pottery broke before Shabbos, even Rebbe Yehuda would agree that since you knew that this was just a shard at the inception of Shabbos and it had limited functionality, even Rebbe Yehuda would agree that whatever it's usable for, you can use it. So Tani Chada Masikin Bekalim Vein Masikin Beshivrei Kalim, V'Tanya Idach Kishem Shemasikin Bekalim Kach Masikin Beshivrei Kalim, V'Tanya Idach Emasikin Lo Bekalim V'Lo Beshivrei Kalim. So the Gemara says we have three different brises. All three are different. The first brisa says that on Yontif you're allowed to use as your fuel both intact and broken utensils. Another brisa says, the first brisa says that you're only allowed to use intact utensils but not broken utensils. Another brisa says you can use both intact and broken utensils. And the third brisa says you may not use neither intact nor broken utensils. So how do you reconcile it? Ha-Rebbe Yehuda, Ha-Reb Shimon, Ha-Rebbe Nechemya. Answers the Gemara, Rebbe Yehuda is the one who says that you can only use intact utensils, but a broken utensil, because it broke on Yontif, it's no light and you can't burn with it. Rabbi Shimon says, Rabbi Shimon is the most lenient, the most liberal when it comes to muktzah, and he therefore says that even if the kli breaks on Yontif, you can still use it. He just doesn't reckon with the concern of nolad. And finally, the brisa that says you can use neither intact or broken utensils, that goes according to Rebbe Nechemya, because he is of the opinion that you can only use a utensil for its designated purpose. If I have a pot and it's meant for cooking food or for containing or for holding items, I cannot use it for fuel. And therefore, neither an intact nor a broken utensil can I use as fuel on Yontif. Amar of Nachman, Hani livni di ishtayor mi binyana shari latiltulinu dechaz lamisku alayhu. If you find bricks on Shabbos or Yontif that are left over from a construction project, you're allowed to move them on Shabbos. Why? Because you can always use them as a stool or as a little stoop to sit on. So that's perfectly fine. They're non-muksa. However, sharginu vadayaksinu. If, however, a person stacked the bricks before Shabbos, then it's clearly indicated that he's setting them aside for a future construction project, and therefore they're muksa. And this is a practical halacha. You can have, let's say, you have a mason working in your backyard, and he's got a stack of bricks. So it depends. If the project is over and he doesn't need the bricks anymore, so then they're not muktzah. If, however, they're still stacked and he plans to use them some more, so then they're muktzah. Amar of Nachman, Amar Shmuel, Cheres Ketana Mutal Taltal B'Chatzar, Aval B'Karmelislo. And this is also something that you're only going to see on this page, or actually, there are other places where this appears. But the point is that you see that there's this principle that, according to some opinions, there are certain kinds of utensils where, depending upon where you find the utensil, will determine whether it's muktzah or not. In other words, is this utensil something that would be prevalent in such a domain? So if you have a small little piece of earthenware, you're allowed to handle it in a courtyard, but not in a carmelis, because it's not so common to find utensils to use in a carmelis. What would you do with a shard or with a small piece of pottery? You'd use it to cover over someone spit out a big piece of mucus, and you don't want to step on it, so you put a piece of pottery over it. The Rav Nachman didei Amar afilu bekarmelis aval b'rishus rabim lo, and Rav Nachman says no. Even if you find such a shard in a carmelis, you can use it to cover something on the ground, but you cannot use that in a rishus harabim because there utensils are even less common, even less prevalent to find. And v'Rava Amar afilu b'rishus harabim. And Rava says no, even if you find a shard in Rishus Harabim, you can use it, because according to Rava, you look at the object, not at the domain wherein it is found. The Ozda Rava Latime, the Rava Habaka Azul Beriska, the Mechuza, and Rava is consistent because once there was a Maisa with Rava, and he was walking in a public area in Mechuza, and in Rishus Harabim, and he's Fasoi Mesane Tina, and his shoes got caked with mud. So Asa Shame Shakal Chasva V'Chamechaper Lei, and his attendant came along, took a shard of pottery in Rishus Harabim, and was helping him to start scraping the mud off his shoe. So Ramu Bey Rabban and Kala, so the rabbis who were around saw him and they said, Shabbos, Shabbos.
He didn't carry it, he was just using it.
No, he wasn't carrying it. It was just a question of using it less, moving it less than Dalet Amos. But the problem is still it's muktzah because it's Rishus Harabim. So Amar lo mistaya de lo gemiri migmar nami megamri. He says, no, it's not bad enough that they don't know the halacha themselves, but they're misleading the public in the halacha. He says, ilu b'chatzer havai milo havachazi lechisuyei beimanach and amichazi lididi. He says, if we were in a courtyard, couldn't you use the shard of pottery to cover to use it as a utility item? So here too, I can use it in Rishus Harabim. It makes no difference whether it's Rishus Harabim or a chatzar. If something's non-muktzah, it's non-muktzah. Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, Magufis Chavis Shenechtita Mutil Taltala B'Shabbos. If you have a lid of a barrel that is burst, so the lid can no longer be used for the barrel, but it still has functionality. So therefore, you're allowed to handle it on Shabbos. And Tanya Nami Hachi Magufa Shenechtisa Hiu Shvareha Mutil Taltala B'Shabbos. The Brisa says this. The Brisa says that both the lid and the shards of the broken barrel, as long as they have some functionality, you can use them on Shabbos. The only thing you're not allowed to do is that, let's say the shards of the barrel have jagged edges, and you want to be able to use a piece of that barrel to act as a prop, to prop up the leg of your bed or in some way, or as a door stopper, but the problem is it's jagged on its edges and you can't use it that way. You cannot smooth those edges in order to be able to use it as a kli. And the reason is because that's tikkun mana. Then you're fixing a kli on Shabbos. That we don't allow you to do. And then finally, if you throw it in the garbage, so then, even though it's a legitimate kli and it's non-muktzah, but by precluding it actively by throwing it away, then you declare it to be muktzah. So Maskefla Rav Papa Elameata Zarakle Leglime Hachanami Da'asar. So Rav Papa challenges us. He says, are you suggesting that if a person were to throw his coat into the garbage, it would automatically become muktzah? Rav Papa says, what are you talking about? Once something's a kli, it's a kli. You know, you can't have it both ways. So Ela Amar Rava Im Zarkami Ba'ojam La Ashba Asur. So Rav Papa therefore modifies it. He says, if you threw it away before Shabbos, then you've demonstrated that it's no longer something that is within your purview of availability, and that's what makes it muktzah. That fact that you precluded it biyadayim actively before Shabbos. Amar Bar Hamduri Amar Shmuel Kromio Shel Machatzeles Mutal Taltalam b'Shabbos. And finally, the last thing we'll see today is Bar Hamduri says in the name of Shmuel that if you have a frayed mat, so the strands of the mat that became frayed are allowed to be used. They're not considered to be muktzah on Shabbos. So my time, Amarava Bar Hamduri Asperli. Bar Hamduri explained it to me. He says, Machatzelas gufala my chazya l'chisuye bei Avraham haminami chazin l'chisuye bei tinofes. He says, just like a mat is used to place on the ground for you to sit down on, so too these fragments that fray off of the mat can be used to cover unseemly things on Shabbos. Amar Reb Zera Amar Rav Shiari prosmios asal l'taltalon b'Shabbos. Reb Zera says in the name of Rav that if you have shmatas that are just basically pieces of fabric that are from a garment, you're not allowed to handle those on Shabbos. And he says we're talking about little pieces of fabric that are smaller than 3 by 3 tfachim, because since they cannot be used as an article of a garment or an article of clothing or any utility, neither for the rich or for the poor, they're considered to be totally muktzah. But if it were to be a larger piece of fabric, even a shmata is not considered to be muktzah on Shabbos. Have a wonderful day. It's both. I'm sorry, my mistake. 3 by 3 fingers. Excuse me. Thank you, Mark. Have a wonderful day.